Hello everyone, today we are going to check how to use Chrome DevTools like a pro. And I have prepared just an overview of Chrome DevTools and a few tips and tricks for you and how you can use it in your own advantage to try to streamline and improve your workflow in developing websites. That's sweet. First of all, how do we open Chrome DevTools, right? We are on a website, we want to open it. You have a couple options. The first one is just going to the settings in here. You can find it if you just go to More Tools and Developer Tools, like this, okay? DevTools, it's the shortcut of Developer Tools. If you want to just open it, you can do Ctrl-Shift-I, or in my case, I also use F12. So this is probably just on Windows, but I usually use F12 to open Chrome DevTools, okay? So in here, the first thing that you'll notice is that we have a few panels in here. Each of these panels has a different purpose. So most of the names already tell you what it means, right? So elements, it's probably going to be something related to elements, right? And then console and sources, network, we can see network requests, performance, we can inspect the performance on the side, memory, we can inspect how the memory is being allocated on the side. Then application, it has a few things, we'll go over it in a second, etc., right? So each panel in here has a different purpose. Now, right now you can see the DevTools, the entire doc in here down below, but probably if it's the first time that you've opened it, it doesn't look like this. And the reason is because you can actually change how the panel is docking. Right now, I like to have it like that down below, but I know that there's many people who likes to just have it on the side, which is good. The only problem that I have having it on the side is that I have then very limited view. If I try to inspect network, for example, it's very clustered and I don't like it personally, but maybe you do. You can have it on the left like this. You can have it also extracted and it's going to pop up, okay? In my case, I like to have it down here, basically because the screens that I use are horizontal, right? So I have more horizontal real estate. So I like to just make use of that. And in this case, that works for me. It's up to you. Great, okay. So let's make an overview of each of the panels first, and then we'll start from elements and we'll keep going, okay? There are a few cool things that we can see today. So first of all, elements, as I mentioned, is the place where you can interact with the DOM. The DOM is the document object model. The DOM is essentially the representation of the site in here, right? Each of these nodes that you see here, each of these lines, it's an object. And this is because the browsers interpret the sites as just JavaScript objects. Like this. So every single thing that you see in here, the DOM, the document object model, it's because it's a model of the entire site based on objects. And each of these objects will have a lot of things that we can check. We'll have a lot of properties. We'll have a lot of methods. We'll have a lot of ways that we can interact with them. Okay? Great. We'll move into that in a second. Console, it's essentially the JavaScript console. Anything custom code related, code related, can happen in here, okay? In the console, you can run JavaScript. You can see errors that are popping up. You can see things that are being logged on the console. You can make the stack trace of things, but then it's going to be connected with sources. You'll see it in a second. It's very, very, very handy, not only when debugging, but when developing too, because you can test things very quick. You can see when things are failing. You can see where things are happening, when they're being executed. You'll see that in a second, etc. Sources, it's a big place. It's a big tab that may be scary at first. And essentially, sources, you can see every external source that it's interacting with the site. That means the HTML that we're loading, because the HTML is coming from an external source, right? The CSS that we're loading, the JavaScript that we're loading, etc. And with all these sources, we can interact with them. We can see exactly when a specific line is being executed. We can overwrite things. We can create reusable snippets so we can quickly run them a bunch of times, etc. Okay, very handy too. Network, You don't have to be a genius to understand what's a network, but essentially you can see all the network requests that are happening on the site. You can see when things are being requested and when are being responded to. Network requests can be broken down into many different categories. So it's not only about just typical requests, because it depends on the content that you're sending, the content that you're requesting, the methods that you're using, etc. We'll see that too. Performance, we can record exactly what's going on the site. And we can see the detailed breakdowns of interactions that happened on the site and all the processes that those interactions generated. So for example, imagine that I'm just inspecting how my app is doing when I'm clicking on something, and then maybe it's rendering a list or it's doing some action. Here in the performance tab, we'll be able to make a recording of the memory usage, of the performance of what's everything that's happening. And then we can inspect the amount of time that it took to do X action, the memory that was consumed to do the X action. If there was some memory leaks, so we can see something was consuming too much bandwidth at some point, etc. So very interesting. Memory in this case, it's a bit more specific because memory, it's related to how the browser is currently storing data in the memory. Like for example, when you're writing code and you have a closure, a JavaScript closure that just storing memory on the heap, for example, you can see a detailed breakdown of all the allocations in the memory. This one is very advanced, and I don't think that we'll go over it today, but it's good to know that it's in here in case that you're developing and you want to know where memory is being allocated every time. Maybe in the future, if we have time, we'll do it. Application, it's also very interesting because you can see exactly all the different state that it's stored in the application. You can see the local storage, you can see session storage, you can see the IndexedDB storage, which is a very long persistent storage. You can see the cookies, you can see the service workers, you can see the cache, you can see everything that is being stored in the browser on this specific site. Okay, I think that we'll have enough time to go over it today. Then security, just about SSL certificate. I don't think that it has very much value, but you can just inspect if the site has an SSL certificate and you can see more info about that. Then all of these that you can see here, AppBlock, Lighthouse, Belt, and Layers. Layers actually, I'll get to that in a second. All of these are just extensions that I have installed. So I have an extension that it's AppBlock, so the extension has the ability of adding a panel in here. Yeah, I have an extension of Lighthouse, so I can run Lighthouse directly from here. I have an extension to debug Svelte applications. Those it's just extension specific, so it's not like I can tell you how all the panels are always going to work. But just for you to know, there are some extensions that inject stuff in the Chrome DevTools, so you have more controls over the site. Okay, and usually people, that's what they see, right? You see these panels and you think that that's it. But if you go over here in the three dots, there's this More Tools tab that allows you to open all of this, which is essentially other panels that also have more cool functionalities that are very powerful. And maybe they don't have them in here because they are not as much used, but they are actually very cool. There are many things that are so interesting. Like for example, you could see CSS overview. You could see exactly an overview of all the CSS of a site. Like you can see all the colors, you can see all the classes that are being used, all the currencies. You can see if there are dead classes, things that styles that it's called, things that are not being used, stuff like that. Very cool. There is another tool called Layers, which is very interesting because you can inspect a site and you can see exactly all the Z-index layers. So you can, let me just show you, but if there is different Z-index, you can even have a 3D view of the site to see if an element is on top of another element, stuff like that. But we'll get into this later because I think it's very cool and we can just have fun with it. Okay. So just for you to know, these More Tools, it's a place where you can find many more things than the ones that you see right away just when opening DevTools. Okay, I missed this for a long time, and when I realized that there were more tools, was like, oh my god, this DevTools is actually huge. So very, very interesting. And the last thing, obviously, is that there is the settings panels where you can select a bunch of things related to preferences, and there are other good things that maybe we'll go over if we have enough time. So let's start by just inspecting what do we see here when we select elements. As I mentioned before, this just creates a tree of the site, so you can see exactly, obviously, everything that you will also see inside Webflow. So you can see the parent, and you can see all the children, you can see more children, etc. You can collapse them just for this, convenience, etc. You can also mutate the DOM. So when you are in here, you're not only limited to inspecting stuff, you can move stuff around, for example, like that. Maybe I just want to put it in here. And this is very cool when you're just trying to make, if the site has been already published, you're not inside the designer, and you would like to tweak some stuff, it's very convenient. Like maybe I want to check how things would look if I move them around. Maybe this element, I want to move it down here. Actually, I'm just messing it up like this. You can move stuff around. You can completely edit a site right from the DevTools in here. You can also change the content. Maybe I don't want to have this. I want to just say, hey, Finsweet plus folks, like this. So you can totally mutate anything that it's inside the DOM. You can change text, you can change images, you can change attributes, you can change classes, you can change anything. And this, for quick debugging and for quick iterations, this is very, very helpful, okay? Now, when we select an element, like this, for example, let's just select this. By the way, you have also this arrow in here, very convenient when you want to select something from the site. You just click on the arrow, and then you are good to click another element, and it's going to focus that element right inside the tree here. It's very convenient. Cool. So we have an element that is selected. Now, the first thing that maybe I want to do, I have this element, I found it out, but I can't see it on the screen, right? So one cool thing that you could do is right click on it and say, scroll into view. And when I do this, I'm going to just move directly and see it right on the screen. Convenient if you're trying to debug a specific element. But first, I want to talk about the panels that we see on the right in this case. Okay, I have a styles panel, I have a computer panel, layout panel, event listeners, and then there are a couple more that are hidden. It depends on how big your screen it is. It's going to collapse them in here. But we have DOM breakpoints, we have properties, and we have accessibility in here. Okay, all of these are very convenient when you're trying to debug stuff. But let's start with just the styles panel in here. Styles panel, it's essentially where you can see all the styles that are applied to specific element. Okay, these styles can be applied, essentially be applied either by built-in styles from the browser, either by inline styles that you've added to the element. So you can add inline styles. Like imagine that I do stuff like style and then display none. So this inline style, I can see it right away from here. I can enable and disable styles. Very cool if you want to just change things and you want to see how different styles would affect an element. Okay. I also can see styles that are affected by CSS classes, by tag styles, by different breakpoints. So if there are some media queries that are being affecting the element, we can see them. Okay. So essentially, when you start just looking around in here, you will see a bunch of sections like this. Okay. Each of these sections belongs to a selector that is affecting this element. So imagine that I have 3 different CSS classes. Each CSS class has some styles on it. And then all those 3 CSS classes are applied to the element. I would see 3 different sections explaining, okay, this CSS class has these styles. This CSS class has these styles. And then if there's some media query, something that it's affecting because it's a different breakpoint, I would also see a specific section for that, and so on and so forth. Okay. So this is very, very helpful when you try to just know exactly how an element it's looking like that like what's making this element look like this, right? I want to inspect how does this element look like this, like what styles are affecting to it, right? So I can just go ahead and inspect, and I can see that, for example, the font size, it's happening because there is a CSS property that's just checking if the clamp is supported, and also there is a class called type h4. So this type h4, we can see that this class is added to the element, right? And we can see that this class has the font size, the line height, like this. We know that these styles come from this specific place. This will be the similar thing like in Webflow, where you can see the inherited styles. Like you can see where is an element inheriting the styles from, like if it's coming from a CSS class that it's applied to the element, or if it's from parent, etc. You can see that right away from here, right? You can also see when some styles are being overridden. Like imagine that you have a combo class, right? Let me just go to Webflow. So imagine that I have an element, right? And I have a CSS class applied to it, like, hold on, test, right? And I have something like display block, and then I add a combo class like other blah, and I change this to display flex. You can see all of the styles that are applied to the element, and you would see how a specific style is being overridden by another style, right? The same that it's happening here, that a combo class, it's overriding the display property. The other, it's overriding the display property from the test. You can see it right away from here. If it's crossed like this, it means that some other property, some other selector, some other class, or any other type of CSS selector, it's overriding this specific property like this. So for example, in here, there is a more specific override that it's changing the value of font size. Okay. Another cool thing that you can see, but it doesn't really apply to Webflow developers because we do most of the things inside Webflow, but it's whenever you have some invalid properties like this, Chrome is just going to flag it for you. It's going to say, hey, this is not actual valid CSS, so maybe you just want to check out what the hell did you writing here. Okay, so this is cool. Okay, more things. We can also just toggle states on an element, right? Let me try to find a button like this. Let's just do, by the way, if you want to quick inspect something on an element, you can always right click on it and hit on inspect, and it's also going to focus it so you can have access right away on it. So imagine that I want to debug something very quick, but I want to debug the actual hover state. Maybe I want to change the color of this hover state, right? Same that in Webflow, you could do stuff like hover in here, so you can toggle a state on an element. You can do the same here in Chrome DevTools. So you just need to go to hover in here, and you can see the different element states that maybe you want to trigger. Maybe you want to trigger the hover, and you can see now that I can now see the styles that are affecting these elements on hover, right? Because we are toggling the state, you can see how now the element is forced to be hovered like this. Maybe you want to focus it, and now I can see the outline of the element when it's focused. Visit it, we can do target, focus, active. You can have all these pseudo states toggled based on your convenience. You can also change the classes on an element. Maybe you just want to just check real quick, like what if I remove a class? You can just disable it from here, super quick. So you go here in the classes abbreviation that you have, and that's it. Just toggle it. Maybe you want to add a new class like this, and it's going to show somewhere. Where is it? It should show somewhere in here. Maybe there are no properties. Maybe it doesn't show. Maybe it doesn't. So in that case, you will have to add it yourself, and then you will try to do .new, and then you can add some properties like display none, whatever. Okay, this is up to you. You can create new classes. You can tweak around things. Very convenient, especially when you have a site that you don't have access to the designer. It's very convenient. Yep. Okay, what else? You can trigger, but this doesn't really apply to Webflow because we don't have control of it. But in CSS, there are pseudo-states. There are media queries where you can control how you want an element to look like, depending on if the user prefers light schemes or dark schemes. So a dark theme, it's based on the settings in the browser. So you can force that too. Like maybe I want to see exactly how would a site look like if I prefer to see the dark mode. And if the site has the settings for that, you could toggle it right from here. Okay, great. And I think that there are just a couple more things to mention here from the styles panel. One is that you can modify CSS variables from here. And now that we have CSS variables in Webflow, now you probably want to take a look at this. You essentially, all the CSS variables that are being used on an element, that are being applied to the element, you will be able to see them also from the styles panel here. Maybe you want to change something. Maybe you want to add a new variable to see exactly how it would look like. I don't know. It's up to you. Okay. The next panel would be the computer panel. Okay. This computer panel, the same that I showed you here, how you can see properties that are maybe not affecting the element or are being overridden, etc. In the computer panel, you just see the properties, the final properties. Like after computing everything, after checking what selectors apply to the element, what properties apply to the element, what properties are being overridden by a more specific selector, stuff like that, the computer panel just spits out the final result, right? This essentially, it's what's defining how the element looks like. So the box sizing, the color, the cursor, the display, etc. And everything that it's affecting how the element displays on the site, it's defined in this computer property. Okay. Layout, in this case, it doesn't really apply to us because, again, we have Webflow and we can play around with grids and flags inside Webflow. But one of the cool things that you could do right from Chrome, from DevTools in here, is that you can inspect the grids, for example, right? You can see how a grid looks like. And in this case, I can see, okay, this is a grid. Here are the separators. You can always navigate to the element that it's defining in the grid. I believe that you can tweak stuff. Like the separation of the grid, things like this. I believe that now if you go to styles panel and we inspect the element, if you go to the display property of grid or flags, you can have these two choices of grid or flags. If you go to the display property, you will see a very similar way of tweaking the styles of the grid like in Webflow. So you can change how the content is aligned. You can change the justify content. You can change, probably you can also change the gap of the grid if you find it, because I don't know right now, etc. So it's also convenient if you just want to move things around, but you really don't want to do it inside Webflow because maybe you mess stuff, you can do it very quickly and conveniently here in the layout panel for grids and for flags. So you can also do the same for flags box, okay? It's up to you. Okay, cool. Event listeners. And this one, it's convenient if you are writing JavaScript code and you're trying to debug how an element is being affected. Okay, let's actually open some Webflow site. Let's just open Finsweet.com, for example. Imagine that I want to know exactly how something is happening. Maybe I want to inspect, like when I click on an element, like what happens, right? I want to see some interaction in here. Probably this is an interaction. Let me see 1 second. It might look like. Okay, so if we go to event listeners and we don't select ancestors, so maybe we can find some event listener in here. Okay, cool. So for example, you can see how this products element, the one that I'm focusing right now, we can inspect all the event listeners that are registered to this element. And we know that there is a key down event listener, there's a mouse enter event listener that's probably doing some animation, something like that. It's doing also a mouse up. So when I click on it, probably this showing and hiding of the menu, it's happening via a Webflow interaction that has some JavaScript. So we can inspect this and we can also see exactly where it's being originated. And in this case, we could go ahead and see that this specific toggle, it's happening in here. Hold on, let me do it again. Click. Now, and here, you can go right in the exact JavaScript line that defined this specific event listener, which is very cool when you're trying to debug. Like I'm trying to understand how this element is behaving. Maybe this is some code that you didn't really write, or you just want to know exactly how something was built. You can just inspect the event listeners, and then you can trace all that's happening. But then this is a source panel discussion, so we'll see it later. Here is saying this is not really about debugging, but you can run commands in the dev console, yes, and they have a capture full size screenshot command, which is pretty handy when you need full page screenshots. This is cool, and actually I didn't know that you could do this. Capture full size screenshot. Nice. Okay, the more you know. Thank you, Per. That's a cool trick. This is actually, the command, it's actually pretty cool. So when you do Shift Command P, or if you're in Windows, you do Shift Control P, there are essentially a lot of different commands that you can run related to JavaScript, related to the site, related to sources of the CSS, blah, blah, blah. There are many things. If we have time, we'll go over it. Okay, great. Now, imagine that you want to also do some more debugging, and you're trying to debug, for example, let me open this site in here. This site is one site that we built to do some showcasing of attributes filter. So essentially you can do some filtering and you can look around, stuff like that, right? And imagine that somehow you want to understand how something is happening on the site, right? And imagine that, for example, I want to understand how when I type in here, this text is being updated, right? So there's some logic, there's some JavaScript code that is doing this, but I really don't know exactly how to do it, right? One thing that you can do is you can inspect an element and you can right click on it, or you can click on the three dots in here and you can break on. So when you do break on, essentially what you're saying is, I want you to stop executing JavaScript code. I want you to just break when there's a subtree modification, or when there's an attribute modification, or when the node is removed. Okay, so if we do subtree modifications in here, like this, when I start typing, because this element is going to be modified, I should be able to see exactly where it happened. So now what it happens is that Chrome just paused the execution, just paused everything, and showed me the exact line of code where this is happening. And in this case, it's minified, so it's not very convenient to see, but I can see exactly the function that it's updating the element, the text content, when something changed. Okay, I know that this is pretty advanced, but it's what you can see then when you have this breakpoint. You essentially have this dot in here, and you can also see it when you go to the dumb breakpoints. Now you can see how I have this activated. I can enable it or disable it, or I can just remove it from once for all, like this. Okay, it's very advanced. I know that most of you are not going to use it, but it's cool to know exactly, especially when you're trying to debug some site behavior. Yeah, it's very convenient. Okay, properties. Okay, so as I mentioned before, the DOM, it's the document object model. It's just a representation of the site as JavaScript objects. Okay, each of these elements that you see here, each of these lines, it's an actual JavaScript object that contains properties and methods. Okay, these properties essentially define what this element does. Okay, and we can just inspect it. If we just see in properties, we can see, all the attributes that are added to the element. We can see all the children, all the classes, the height of it, the width of it. We can see if the content is editable. We can see what's the first child. We can see many properties like the ID, if it's hidden, if it's inert, the language. So essentially everything that defines this element, it's defined via properties that are actually JavaScript properties. Okay, and these properties, it's the same thing that you would find out if you console log this element. Okay. So one way of console logging an element, obviously would be going to the console, doing document query selector, and then trying to query the element, right? But we are using Chrome DevTools, and in Chrome DevTools we have more helpers. And one of the helpers is you can right click on an element and you can store it as a global variable like this. And now what's happening is that I have this temp1 variable that represents this element. And now I can interact with the element. It's an object, right? So I can just see things like, is it an ID? Is it hidden? Or maybe I want to do other stuff, like maybe I want to change the styles of it. You can display, I can change. So it's completely up to you what you can do with the element. Yeah. And essentially just store it as a variable and you can interact with it. It's very cool. It's very convenient. Another thing, I know that there are shortcuts to do this. I think that when you have an element selected in here, I believe that you can do something like $1. Yeah, you can get the element that it's selected with $sign and a number. And I believe that this, if you follow more numbers, it's just drilling down the dependency tree. So the 0 would be the currently selected. So the main, the 1 would be the child, the 2 would be the form, right? Am I saying that right? I think so. Oh, right. I mean, because I have it selected in here. And so if I do 0, would be the main, the form. Now, I believe that actually this is a history. So if I do, hold on, I'm just trying to make sure that I'm giving you the right info. I believe that if I select something like this, and this, and this, then the numbers represent the last elements that you selected. So 0 would be the one that you selected first, and then it just keeps giving you the history. I believe so. I think so. Okay, it's convenient. It's just a quick way of accessing the elements. Okay, great. What else to say about the elements panel? Well, if you right click on an element, you have a few controls, like you can conveniently add an attribute. You can edit the HTML as just plain HTML. So if I click on edit HTML, I have now a full editor that I can just use to do some stuff in here. It's convenient too if you want to somehow write custom HTML. In this case, you probably don't want to do it because you have already the HTML embed in Webflow, but it's convenient. Okay, you can remove an element, you can clone an element, so you can duplicate it, you can copy and paste it, you can, I believe that if you do stuff like JS path, hold on. Yeah, that's the, you have a few controls of copying things. Like maybe you want to get a quick way of doing a query with JavaScript of an element. So just come in here and say copy, and I want to copy JavaScript path in here, and now I'm gonna get a query selector for this specific element using JavaScript. Convenient if you wanna somehow come up with a selector. You can copy it different other ways. You can copy just the HTML in case that you wanna use it somewhere else. You can copy the styles. It just gives you the styles there from the computed panel, etc. Okay, cool. What else? You can span, you can collapse, you can focus, you can scroll into view as I showed you before. And that's pretty much it. Something that I missed that I didn't explain is that you also have a device controller, a device simulator in here. It's this icon in here. When you click on it, you can check the site the same that you can do in Webflow. So you can resize on a site, you can simulate different elements. So you can simulate an iPhone, you can simulate an iPad Air, you can simulate a Galaxy Fold. It's convenient. You can do the same in Webflow, I know, but if you want to do it right in the public site, you can also do it. Okay, so imagine that you want to understand how for example, a screen reader would process this site. Right? You want to know how users who are using the keyboard are going to navigate through the site. You want to know when a screen reader processes the focused elements, what's the screen reader going to tell the user, etc. So there's this panel, accessibility panel that I forgot, that allows you to create a full page accessibility tree. And this, if we enable it, we'll have to reload DevTools in here. Now you will find that there's this icon in here, this man, this with the open arms. And when you click on it, now you will get a representation of the entire site based on everything that makes it accessible, from what's focusable, what's going to allow people to navigate, what content is going to be communicated to the user, etc. And this is very convenient when you want to make sure that you're building an element and the element it's fully accessible. For example, in here, you can see how we have a link that it's focusable, but the link it's not visible, but it's focusable, right? So I know that when I tap, I will now be able to focus this link. Oh, surprise, you didn't know this. This skip to content element is in here, and it's specifically added for people who are just navigating with a keyword, right? I could potentially just missed it, but I can find it thanks to the accessibility tree, because it's telling me there's a link that it's focusable, so I can focus it with a tap in here, right? And then inside it, there's some static text that's saying skip to content. So I know that people who are using a screen reader, for example, when they focus this element, this is going to shout out to them, skip to content. And they will know that they can click on it because it's a link. So this is just giving me info about how the accessibility tree looks like on my site. So that's it for today. Stay tuned because there's actually a lot of more content that we can just talk about. DevTools, it's huge. There are a lot of things, okay? So if you really want to keep learning about DevTools, stay tuned. Next stream is going to happen in a few weeks, but we'll release and we'll talk about the other panels, console, network, we'll see, okay? So if you like this, please leave a like, leave a comment, share it on Twitter, just shout out to us, and I appreciate it. Thank you.